Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Mikhelishvili. I lead Amadev Pharma, a health tech impact startup that specializes in performance analytics and operational intelligence. We use a unique deep metrics formula in management that combines the elements and certainty of sports and data science to help life science organizations improve their performance and strategy and bring innovative products to patients. Today, I welcome you to our live webinar. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. Thank you, everyone, for registering. Because today we are going to be talking about a very challenging topic, and that's very timely today. Translating the daily contributions of medical affairs into impact and reward. Why is this so important today in particular? Well, today work doesn't seem to stop at all. So we better know how to make work count, right? And so the premise behind today's webinar is that quantifying and communicating our daily work will determine how well and why we work. Okay. And so looking forward to your comments and questions. We have an incredible panel of speakers today with some experience in manufacturing, leading R&D companies, medical affairs leadership and operations, management consulting leadership with charitable organizations such as Helmsley Trust. And so add to the conversation, ask your questions. This is a very unique opportunity. And let's start with getting to know our panelists and speakers. Graham, so you are our special guest for the first time in this monthly webinar series that we call Design New Ways of Working in Medical Affairs. Welcome. Please share a little bit of your background for a minute.
Thanks for inviting me, Tim. Really appreciate the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with the audience. I originally trained as a clinical biochemist and worked in biopharma a number of years in oncology research, academic, and then over the last 20 years in various commercial leadership roles in small, medium, and large companies, all in life sciences, running global operations, building teams, and motivating people to perform at the highest levels. I'm based in Boston, by the way.
Great. Welcome. Jeff, hello again. Welcome.
Hi, Tim. It's great to join you again, and great to be with your audience. So just refresher, I've been in medical affairs for the past 25 years at small, medium, and large size companies in a variety of therapeutic areas, and have concentrated in operations. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart.
Yes, thank you. Alex, welcome again, of course.
Thank you. Thank you.
How are you?
Great. Just as a refresher, happy to be here. I have around over 10 years of experience in life sciences, management consulting, and working with various SaaS companies, really targeting and being a part of the life science space and being a part of that advancement.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, we have a lot of ground to cover today. We're going to be reviewing some of the latest research and hearing the reactions from our speakers and the audience. So here is our agenda today. We'll talk about how medical affairs is changing, how we have to adapt and pivot, right? What really drives us to perform, those underlying unseen factors, share some practical solutions, and then talk about why it's so important to communicate this impact that we have in a function that's strategic and also supportive, and also tied to reward as well. So as we heard, we have very diverse experience on our panel today. And so we'll do our best to consider very different perspectives from the entire spectrum of healthcare, the continuum of healthcare. Okay. So I want to ask this question. to you, what is making medical affairs become so challenging, so difficult today?
Well,
What are some of the drivers? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, medical affairs, this has been a perennial question for medical affairs for as long as I've been involved with it, because there's not a direct connection between the business and what we do in terms of education and facilitating, research. So it's a thorny question. How do you demonstrate value when you can't draw those direct connections?
Yes. Do you think that the environment, also the added pressures of showing your productivity, justifying your investments and resources, the lower margins of errors, and the complexity of disease also has to do with revisiting how medical affairs teams can now educate their healthcare community, patient advocates, physicians. And after all, we have so many ways to measure our performance. At any given point, a CEO or an executive can determine who the lowest performer is or highest performer given today's analytics capabilities. However, are they really measuring what they need to be measuring? And how can we be more proactive in adapting to this complexity? This is also another question that I heard recently at a project portfolio management conference in Philadelphia, where an executive provided that reality, that, the aspect of reality that it's being done now as we speak, whether or not we like metrics. And so, any other comments from you in terms of this changing, growing complexity and change?
Well, I would just add on what you said. I think we're really good at measuring activity, but not so good at measuring impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here are some other thoughts that we had as we began to discuss, this topic. Right, the daily pressures of new ways of working today. Physicians are now using not only ChatGPT, but even technology such as open evidence, which has a very strong accuracy of retrieving data from PubMed via chat, via this kind of conversation, continuous conversation, for example. And so medical affairs now have more competitors as well, right, through technology that they can collaborate with, but they have to grab the attention in this precious time that physicians have as well. So maybe from a healthcare perspective as well, and from what you've seen in drug development, Graham, what are some ways that we can address this complexity?
Well, I think in terms of we live in a world of digital cacophony at the moment. Everyone and everything is vying for our attention. It's very easy to get lost in the noise. I think in terms of individual contributions and team contributions and focus on the mission, it's really, I think, essential that we understand what the goals are and the objectives, and to have a framework and a mindset within that team of understanding what we're trying to accomplish. And through data, one can do that. But complexity is definitely an anchor on many aspects of our daily lives and our work. And obviously, I assume this is just as equally a problem in medical affairs.
Yeah. Thank you, Graham. So Jeff alluded to some of the details in terms of what we're measuring, and we have many blind spots. We're making a lot of decisions using incomplete data. Medical affairs teams are quite large and diverse, some of whom speak to customers, interface with physicians, respond to medical information inquiries, but we don't often know what medical communications or publications professionals contribute, because we don't capture it in the platforms that we do have. right? Or we've captured in multiple different formats. How we distribute our work throughout the day, right? Work doesn't seem to stop, and so our workflows, who collaborates with whom in order to drive those patient and business outcomes. Right? Global benchmarking has shown that 70% of our teams across the globe, 51 pharma companies, do not analyze systematically how their activities lead to outcomes. And what we're seeing is what, we really should not be surprised, which is lost revenue, bad forecasting, a lot of errors in strategy and mass layoffs. And so Jeff alluded to some of the data points that we've already shared in previous monthly webinars in terms of that difference between what we should be measuring versus what we are measuring, right? So we're measuring how we're changing the beliefs and behavior and behaviors among our HCP community. And we need to be measuring more of the bottom line outcomes, right? Not the activities and just the insights and what we distribute, what information we educate them with. And we're not very happy with how effective we are. Okay, this is some data from field medical teams who meet with physicians and key opinion leaders as well. Beliefs and insights are very important and they're key responsibilities, but we should be measuring how we ultimately drive improvement in healthcare quality and clinical outcomes. Okay, this is some of the latest data from the 2025 Medical Science Liaison Society KPI survey of 1,000 professionals, who say that only 3% of them believe that the current KPIs are effective. And that's probably not very surprising, right? No one really embraces or looks forward to being measured, right? No one wants to measure their performance after a busy day. However, in order to drive those aspirational values that we have of collaboration, of performance, productivity, unless we keep ourselves accountable to them in more objective ways due to the capabilities that we have, we're likely to continue to see the same trends. Okay, and so some of the other points that I'll bring out for all of you to react to is that there's a preference for more qualitative KPIs rather than quantitative KPIs amongst this sample of 1,000 medical affairs leaders. And they're getting a lot of information that's somewhat subjective. Feedback from their manager, 70%. Internal stakeholder support, because medical affairs train sales teams nationally, globally, right? They educate physicians on how to enhance efficacy. But what they want to measure more is the quality of the engagements, not just the numbers of those engagements, right? Get more of the feedback from physicians themselves. 62% versus 40%, right, is what's being currently done. And the quality of actionable insights as well, right? For example. And so how do we make this information more objective, right? Before we go on to the next topic, I want to ask for any comments, just brief top-line comments from that data. Anything surprising? Jeff, Graham, particularly, maybe you have some. It would be, go ahead, Graham.
From my perspective, I see purpose and motivation. And some of those preferred KPIs there are related to individual contribution. And they want to see that they're making a difference. If one cannot understand where you fit in the big picture and the impact you and your team is having, it can lead to complacency and demotivation. So I think having access to that data can be inspirational and motivating for a team.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll certainly ask you about some of your personal examples as well, because I know you are a scientist who turned sales leader and also an athlete, I might add. I know Jeff and Alex also have their athletic preferences and experience as well. So I'll ask you that question later about how you've taken those lessons. Jeff, I thought you went off mute. Jeff.
Well, Graham's exactly right. I think he hit the nail on the head. I think what we still struggle with, though, is how to measure that, the quality, and how do we make those connections?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think, as Graham and Jeff just mentioned, it's almost that transparency that helps sort of bring more engagement from employees, knowing, their efforts are being, sort of maybe not tallied or counted, but are sort of being stored. And so when, they're able to see that, and, not just wait every 3 months for a performance review, but actually see how they're stacking up to the other employees. And I think that is very important across the board.
Okay, wonderful. So now that we're kind of shifting gears and transitioning into some of those individual motivational drivers of performance, which is a great segue there, I want to ask you what you believe stimulates these highly credentialed scientists and innovators in medical affairs to perform at their best. Here's a list that I personally came up with based on my experiences over 20 years. But I'm certainly looking forward to your comments. I know that personally, one of the aspects that I've always enjoyed about being in medical affairs is the ability to go to scientific conferences, and without being a bench scientist myself or a researcher, to be able to interact with them and bring in critical, actionable insights that modified or guided our medical strategy and translated into publications, late-breaking abstracts, and different initiatives that ultimately turned around a slow uptake of a launch that only had one adverse event in its label, based on initiatives and persistence from medical affairs, for example. But what on that list, or what from your experiences, do you believe drives them to be the best? Jeff, I want to go to you next.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. So, I would wrap all of those things up into what I would call meaningful contribution. And I think what's unique about medical affairs is it's bi-directional. So, as you said, we can collect insights and help inform strategy for the company, but I think it can be just as meaningful to surface some new data for a healthcare practitioner, or contribute to some new science or a new publication that informs the larger community about ways to improve patient care. So just the little things that we do that make a meaningful difference, either to a practitioner, a patient, or the company itself.
Yep. And I want to take a quick pause and remind the audience to post your comments and also responses to the questions that I'm posing here. I would love to hear from you. So post your comments in terms of what really drives you to perform at your best in your job. Alex, anything to add there? Here's here's the list I'll kind of show. Anything you'd highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely nailed it. It's about, that larger purpose of, you are bringing a new product to market that will, alleviate symptoms or treat a disease that's, impacted by millions around the globe, and sort of being a part of that team, I think is super motivating. So I think that, stands out, especially, from a scientific perspective. So I think that's huge.
Yep. Yeah. And, to really understand the value of our contributions and our voice as well, you can contrast what happens when you, let's say, share some medical insights and they're not communicated up the chain, for example, or to stakeholders. It can be quite demotivating, right, in terms of your recognition. And there are, granted, some justified reasons for that are mostly organizational or culture related. based on this concept of perception is reality. But based on some of the early comments that we made, in today's world, it's very difficult to hide our performance. Okay, it's exposed. Our performance is exposed. So perception is reality is no longer very relevant today, I might submit here. So here we have a comment from Carla Amigo, who says that in her experience, teams feel very motivated when they have a voice in decision making. Thank you for that comment, Carla. We appreciate that. And certainly it resonates with me as well, based on my experience. So now I'll transition a little bit to outside of medical affairs and talk a little bit about management consulting research, okay, organizational change research, because at the end of the day, medical affairs professionals, they're scientists, they're doctor level professionals, PhDs, PharmDs, MDs, nurses, you name it, right? But they're people, okay, and they all want to demonstrate their impact, and I think all three of you mentioned that. So here's some research that breaks down performance into two types: tactical performance based on strategy, technique, and skills, and adaptive performance. So one that is rooted in innovation, creativity, problem solving. Okay, most organizations over-index on the tactical part, but it's really the proper balance and how to be innovative as well. All right. So when you stimulate your teams in the right way, they can also not only collaborate and perform, but they can also bring new ideas as well. Okay. So here is some research that's based on thousands. It's 20,000 employees in Fortune 500 companies. It's based on research from PhD from University of Rochester from the 1950s that's been adapted in the recent years by Neil Doshi and Lindsay McGregor from MIT. They have experience leading in McKinsey as well. Okay, and our motivation, turns out, boils down to these 6 different domains across the spectrum of total motivation. And so this score has now been validated across organizations in healthcare and beyond. Okay, and if you see this spectrum, play, purpose, and potential are those motivational factors that are directly tied to work and that seem to stimulate performance, the quality of the performance. Whereas emotional pressure, right? You have to do this job because your parents told you that you have to be a doctor or physician, right? Or economic pressure, sustainability, right? Or inertia, where you can't even explain why you go to work tomorrow. It's just because you have to go to work, right? These are, of course, lowest motivational factors. But it turns out that organizations can measure this prospectively, continuously, systematically, and it distinguishes those higher performing organizations, such as Southwest, for example, from others, based on this research. Now, the different processes that we design in organizations also lead to variability in the motivation based on this research. How you design roles, how you have succession planning, for example. Do you have a career ladder in medical affairs? Right. Now, going back to some data from life science organizations and what drives their engagement. This is a global survey, and it shows that challenging work, right, is actually the top motivational factor that drives engagement in life sciences. So this one is healthcare specific organizational change research. Okay, ability to innovate new ways of working, doing work aligned to the skill set, and close to this top 3. Number 4 is getting recognition for my efforts and achievements. Those individual factors, right, that all of you discussed as well. So I was a part of the talent management survey that we did, a benchmarking survey in the Medical Affairs Professional Society a couple of years ago. Okay, and we surveyed 64 companies, received 85 responses from leaders, and we showed that there are quite a lot of differences in talent management. And I can appreciate this, having gone from big pharma companies in the first 7 years of my career to smaller startup companies, where I realized that I had to create my own momentum and opportunities to train and shadow and have mentors, right? So only 42% of medical teams have a current talent growth program in pharma. Okay, 23% in the smaller companies, right? The larger the company, the more opportunities. Okay, so there's clearly a gap in talent management. Now, employee experience. Okay, so how well we work together. How does that really translate into ROI, return on investment, the business value for the companies? In this research across different 13 different industries, we see a particularly pronounced value in healthcare companies. Okay, whereas in all other industries you have a 1-to-1 type of ratio, equal ratio of of contribution of employee experience and collaboration and customer experience. With in healthcare, that improvement in employee experience by only 1 point based on Glassdoor's ratings is correlated with a 3-fold increase in customer experience. So when we work better together, we have also better results with our customers, right? And before I hear your comments, I want to share another inspirational research, another piece of research that has certainly driven a lot of the work that we've done in pharma at Amadeus Pharma, and that is this classic business case from a manufacturing industry of electronic cables. Bill Gore and Associates formed this company with his wife based on what he saw work very well at DuPont, right? Where he saw how employees and colleagues didn't just clock out at 5 p.m., but they worked above and beyond. They helped on different projects. And so what he did was he created a very unique approach to management, okay, to leading organizations. In terms of structure, no hierarchy, small business units, 250 to 300 people. Every employee is assigned a sponsor, not just a mentor, but a sponsor who's incentivized for their success. And they doubled down on KPIs where every single person force ranks 20 to 30 other employees based on one question, one criterion, and that is who's making the greatest contribution to the success of the organization. Okay. The incentives are based on not just tenure or titles or seniority, but on that past year's performance. And they also encourage adaptive, not tactical performance, but adaptive performance, such that 10% of the expected daily workflow is allotted to innovation. How does that translate into decisions? Well, teams are openly asked to challenge the rationale for prior decisions. Okay, similar to what Netflix used to do, right? With their senior management, ask them to make a mistake, even up to a $1 million mistake, right? But have a very Socratic, have a Socratic method of that's very intense to challenge decision making. And so, what in the Bill Gore and W.L. Gore and Associates case, this has led to 60 years of growth, increase in revenue. Now, this company is now 10,000 employees without a single year reporting revenue losses. Okay, so I want to take a pause there. I know it's a lot of information that I shared, and I know that there's a lot of thoughts that triggered amongst our panelists. Who would like to start to kind of see how we can be innovative in medical affairs and integrate the learnings and lessons from different industries in order to stimulate our teams, whom we need? Maybe I'll go to Alex actually first because of his experience with management consulting research. Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was definitely a lot there, but I really liked that the data on the increase in the star review on Glassdoor and what that impacts as far as the company that's been shown through research. I think that's super important. Employee engagement, then it does matter, right? When you're looking at the success of an overall company. And I think the phrase, measure what matters, is definitely sort of echoing in my mind based on, the Gore case that you just mentioned right now, and how, that one single question, what is each employee doing to help improve the company, being the sole question. I think that's super, super important, and very, very innovative at the time, I'm sure, for them to have this sort of regimented, but some flexibility in there with the 10% time allowed to sort of innovate. I think that's sort of, where companies should really look at where the growth of the company comes from, is that engagement. So I think anything to increase the engagement of the company and the employees in the company is going to be super helpful for the success of the company.
Yep. Thanks. Thank you. Graham, Jeff, Graham. Yeah, I see you.
Yeah. The thing that jumped out at me there is the playtime, right? So humans are motivated by several things. We've got to pay the bills, right?
Right.
Many scientists, engineers, and physicians got into their profession because of intellectual curiosity and fascination with science and medicine. And, we're constantly learning. And to constantly learn, we've got to challenge what we know. We've all got blind spots. And to learn, you learn from others. And in teams, if you're allowed to put forth your ideas and others put forth their ideas, you learn from others and you stimulate each other. Having that play and not being afraid of breaking things or making mistakes, whether low importance, low impact. But doing that, you learn. The engineering process, the scientific process, if we all knew what was going to happen, we'd go straight there. We don't. It's iterative. And I think having that space, that allowing to play, experiment, innovate, I think it motivates people enormously.
Yeah. Jeff?
Yeah, I'll add on to Graham. I 100% agree. I think, a few years ago, we used to hear a lot about gamification, of things. And I think that does introduce new challenges and helps us, exceed maybe what, we would otherwise. But I think this is powerful stuff. And just like any other thing that's powerful, it can be dangerous as well. So I think it requires the right culture too, because we don't want to create Survivor, where everybody's just out for themselves, and force ranking everybody else down. So I think it requires, security, and that aspect that Graham was talking about, the fun aspect. We're all on the same team. We're trying to, lift all boats here and making it fun.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about accountability, because wherever we speak about recognitions, it's also runs side by side with accountability, right? If you are a part of a business and you manage a budget, whether or not you're a revenue generating function, right? And as far as I know, there's someone in medical affairs who manages the budget, right? Who's responsible for the budget. So that means that you have to have accountability for the budget. But traditionally, we've been limiting ourselves in being labeled as a cost center and as an expense, right? Because we do not we do not communicate, right, the business impact, and perhaps that's an opportunity to turn what is seen as an expense into an actual, a revenue or an outcome, a business outcome, right? Or an investment. Turn expense into an investment, rather, right? A necessary investment is the word I was looking for. And so let's talk a little bit about how to communicate our medical impact in this modern evidence-based leadership approach. Okay. So we can search for different ways to centralize and coordinate all performance data together. This is something I've had experience with on a consulting basis. For example, recently in a type 1 diabetes launch of a product. But if you have blind spots from different departments, you're not really seeing everyone's performance. Are they incentivized to help each other, right? Are we really measuring our data based on the right information, the quality, right? Are we connecting headquarters to the field or local and global teams, right? So what are some ways that we can communicate and quantify our medical impact better? This is the topic here that we want to kind of focus in on, and one of the ways that we approach this at Amadef Pharma is this deep metrics, a high precision type of approach. As I mentioned, go to work as if it were a sport you like to master, right? Where rules are respected by everyone, communicated transparently, interpreted the same way by everyone, spectators, players, judges, right? And where you have transparency, and you have judges who are your colleagues and your customers, who provide you with that quality feedback that a lot of the MSLs are looking for based on 2025 data that I showed earlier, right? And so this is very timely today, we believe, because of how vulnerable our performance is, right? And because of how uncertain the healthcare ecosystem is, right? So when the resources are low and the stakes are high, you need to prioritize, right? You need to have more certainty that sports and data science provides you, regardless of whether or not you have that sports background, you're an expert, or you're not in what you do, or whether or not you're a scientist. If you take the science approach, scientific, evidence-based approach, and also accountability for not just the results, but also sportsmanship, which is a very important part of sports, right? Where you sit out in a penalty box if you don't follow the rules, for example, right? But then you learn from your failures. So it's not something to dread, but it becomes a record book that you celebrate over time, right? So this is what we're bringing into the daily fabric of all operations, and an ANCORA application that is designed to not just measure performance, but also ultimately translate our daily contributions into impact, okay, and prioritize what we do. So I want to take a little bit of time in just previewing ANCORA once again, as we've been doing in our previous monthly webinars, and then go to our speakers and the audience to ask them about how to communicate and quantify our impact, okay? And so what you're seeing here is a quick snapshot of this scientific approach that adjusts for how metrics change over time, for how the mechanism of how they're collected, who collects metrics, when, the timing, who the judges are, right, determines their quality, right? So this is an approach that's similar to a scientific trial, for example, where you prioritize the strength of evidence, or you set endpoints, but provide them hierarchy, because where everything has the same priority, either nothing gets done or you're just overwhelmed, right? And you don't know where to concentrate, where to focus. So this is a unique grading recommendation that allows you to understand where to prioritize. But I'll jump to this dashboard here, and that is the corporate contribution index, okay? This is really what allows team leaders in medical affairs, in life science companies, to set their own benchmarks, okay? Prioritize what their top objectives are for the company, all the different parameters and components of performance, and have visibility, full visibility of how everyone on the team is doing. Because if you're missing anyone, then that platform is already not valuable, okay? And you're probably not productive, and you're spending a lot of administrative time and burden. So on measuring and communicating performance. So this dashboard takes into account all those adjustments, right, that you make in the settings, and as a result of which you see the relative contributions that are also adjusted by the team size, numbers of FTEs, and also how they align with your objectives. Okay, if you look at product data dissemination, or let's say clinical development support, okay, and you see that your MSLs, or medical science liaisons, who educate physicians, are low on this list, the team, right? Then you're able to adjust and pivot and see that you have 3 team members on this team, only 3 MSLs, and in order for them to, increase, to improve, and go up on this leadership board in terms of contributions, either hire more of them, more MSLs, for example, right, in order to to increase your contributions, or potentially change their workflow so they're more involved in those types of activities that have the highest recommendations and that are more likely to lead to outcomes. Very quickly, I'll show also outcomes, right, and how you can see that that there's collaboration that's taking place, among your teams in real time, and you can see who is contributing on the team from which function, with what activities, to what level of certainty, what degree of certainty, to an outcome that your company considers to be a very bottom line outcome, for example, or as the way you define it, the way you configure it. Okay, in this case, it's a new hospital protocol that uses your clinical trial, from a primary investigator. Okay, and that adapts it, or an outcome that your company shares on their website, in their press release, on their quarterly report. Medical affairs, when they contribute, they want to be able to know how they map to that kind of outcome. And very importantly, I'll show you how we're actually bringing the elements of sports into the real world daily fabric of all business. And we're going to assume that there's a new product formulary addition as an outcome. Okay, and usually what we do is we add that activity and just report that outcome, right? That's what we've been doing for many years, right? Well, if you save this outcome, this system provides you with an error message that reminds you and requires you to ultimately tie that outcome to some activity. So we're pairing outcomes to our activity. We're analyzing our performance or our races like sports athletes do, in order to understand what drives that outcome, in order to be able to repeat that success and also potentially avoid repeat failure. Okay, so what I'm showing here is a particular activity that may have led to this outcome, just as an example. All right, so this is one way that we are actually bringing elements of sports and data science into the daily operations. So what are some of your comments on this approach, or others that you've seen or you used yourself, okay, in terms of communicating and quantifying medical impact? Graham.
So I can talk to it from the perspective of commercial teams, obviously not medical affairs expert here. And transparency and frequent communication are key. So you have dashboards of your KPIs. You know when you won, you know when you didn't, you hit the revenue target, and you get rewarded. Now, there is also danger in a team that you have individual stars, and they shine too brightly and they bring the others down. They don't team well. So having defined roles, responsibilities, and how the individual contributes to that team performance as a whole also has an impact. So regular touching base, regular communication, regular assessment of how am I doing, the individual, and how is the team doing. I think it really allows people to understand where they fit in the team as an individual within the organization, and how they're contributing to the overall success of internal and external stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that you've led a large sales team that was instrumental in growing the revenue of of smart labs, for example, right? And so, how was there a particular frequency that you found valuable of sharing metrics and performance?
Absolutely. We met every week. We want to know, you don't want to get to a certain point in a fiscal period and then realize you're going to miss the target by a big margin.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be able to take corrective actions early. So it's very important to communicate on performance and what's driving that performance. But also, you don't operate in a silo alone. You have to communicate with your other internal stakeholders, all the other functions. At Smart Labs, it was operations, it was engineering, designing, construction. If we didn't communicate frequently to them, we had a mismatch, and we were not able to deliver to the therapeutic company wanting to move in and start their research. So constant communication, constant updates, reassessment of performance.
Yeah. And I've observed very high performing sales teams do that so well. And I've been inspired, I'll be honest with you, but by quite a lot of them throughout my career as well. Just a follow-up question on your experience in rowing and how that was relevant in your sales leadership and in R&D as well.
So I did 9 years of crew. Probably not the tallest guy, so probably not the best physical shape for a rower. And I've also done 30, 40 years of bike racing too.
Biking,
so
right?
individual sport and team sport. And there's very different motivators there. When you're in a crew, your impact is huge. You raise your arm 1 centimeter, the whole boat flops to one side. You've got to be self-aware of your own individual impact on the team performance. And in terms of progressing, feedback, talk to each other, but you've got short-term goals, mid-term goals, and longer-term goals. A mindset of constant improvement, critique, and asking for feedback, asking for help. Super important.
Yep. Okay. What about the kind of the skeptics out there who say, look, metrics lead to more competition, right? Tension. What's your take on tension, the level of the tension you need to have?
You can have an unproductive tension if people feel they're under the microscope and they're being micromanaged. You can have a productive tension where they feel they're adding to the progress and they welcome the feedback in a constructive manner, and they're not going to be beaten over the head with a stick. So creating that productive tension is essential for improvement. If we all think everything's going hunky-dory and there's no problems, we're living in a world that's not real. So I think that creating that environment, trust, respect, understanding that we don't know everything and we're not good at everything, we have strengths and weaknesses, and asking for feedback, and likewise giving feedback, sharing what works, what doesn't.
Yeah, it looks like that one person who may be harming that team or not living up to the standards in the rowing team also needs to know that feedback too, right?
Absolutely.
So that their team can win the next race.
When you measure it, you stand out. And in a rowing team, if you get it really badly wrong, your row doesn't come out of the water and it's very apparent. So you've got this motivation of, I don't want to embarrass myself, but also I don't want to let the team down. And I didn't know I was doing that. The golf swing, I had no idea I was completely pointing the wrong direction. So you need this objective observation and feedback.
Yeah. Jeff, Alex, anything to add there from your experiences in medical?
Yeah, I think this is great. I think, one of the things that we struggle with are sort of the disparate comparisons, between a big, like a field medical team that can, I'm thinking like a medium-sized company, you might have 12 or 15 people on that team versus one or two people in publications, and how do you compare um,
Right.
the activities of the individuals on those two teams? I think
Hmm.
that's one of the things that's kind of requires a lot of forethought, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
All right, go
yeah.
ahead. Sorry.
Okay.
No, I was going to
And
say,
just to kind
based
of
on what
comment on
Jeff,
that real quick,
yeah.
are we potentially not setting standards and maybe just starting somewhere, right? And maybe just looking at publications, but just creating that link between publications and field medical in some way that's centralized. So it's but I completely understand the diversity of all the different roles that there are, but and that's been hampering us for a long time. So perhaps we can be creative in kind of addressing that, Jeff.
I think in this day and age,
Alex, yeah.
awareness and education is so important, especially of technically, complex, theories and solutions in medicine. So publications are huge. We have the ability to find these readily. And this is only going to help the medical affairs liaison officers as well. The
Right.
physician had already seen that publication. So
Mhm.
everyone has a critical, important role to play in that team, and knowing where they fit in the big picture, it can be quite motivating.
Yeah, and I was going to say
Alex?
really quickly, not only how where they fit, but also how they fit, right? And so if you have the publications team working with field medical, the synergistic sort of power of that is going to outweigh the individual contributions if they're not sort of synced and connected. So I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's now conclude our webinar here as we're coming up on time with some of your comments and also questions that I want to invite from the audience. And this last section, let's talk about how to connect medical contributions to reward and what the implications are and the benefits, the advantages, and also the urgency. Why do we need to do it now? Why is it so important to ultimately connect the purpose of why we're capturing performance to real-time progress and reward? All right. And so what happens when impact is not connected to reward? We talked extensively about this and talked about some skepticism that can develop, lack of motivation, but also this we versus they type of internal competition when it's implicit, when there's no metrics and they're unclear, then that tension may not be very productive and it may be unhealthy. Okay. And so how do you define impact in medical affairs? Well, there are some research data points that we've talked about before in previous webinars that talks about medical information, how it improves patient outcomes, right? Or treatment decisions, how physicians use the information that pharma and biotech uses and effectively communicates the context of the value of their products that ultimately leads to improved decision making, right? Education of patients, clarifying dosing regimens, drug use, and avoiding drug interactions, right? So these are just some of the examples of the impact that we're making that is consolidated in one 1 minute short survey that can be used in order to generate this evidence using various platforms, including ANCORA from ANCORA Pharma, which we talked about. Now, how do you determine reward as well, right? These are some of the comments that I want the panelists and our audience to think about. And so let's start with Jeff. Actually, why should we connect our impact to reward? What are the implications and the key goals?
Well, I think it's getting everybody on the same page. I mean, you have to have some agreement on what the impact or the goal is. I think that goes a long way to doing it. And then, I think we talked about this. I've been at lots of companies over the years. And observed that commercial organizations and sales organizations are really good at rewarding their contributors, and medical usually gets invited to these things, and
Yeah.
we're like, what are we, chopped liver, So I think, thinking about how reward and recognition can motivate people in medical is a good thing.
Yeah. Graham?
I think the situations are different in commercial versus medical affairs here. In medical affairs, it strikes me one has to be objective, and it's for the patient good, for the greater good. Rewards there, recognition in front of one's peers to the impact, the overall impact, and communicating that internally so everyone says, yes, thank God you were there. Otherwise, we couldn't achieve that goal. Opportunities for growth, self-improvement, learning, and promotion. So everyone, well, most people, the vast majority, want more responsibility. They want to grow themselves as a person and also be better at their job as well. So I see that super important. Commercial, the incentives are cash. Coin operated to some extent. Don't necessarily want that. There'll be some ethical conflict there potentially in medical affairs.
Yeah. Alex, any comments, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge with commercial having sort of an not easy, I would say, but just much simpler way of sort of assessing value versus the medical affairs team, which I've made this analogy after watching some NBA playoffs. It's, you've got the pick and roll at a basketball game where, not a pick and roll, but you have a multiple sort of block situation where someone's assisting, someone's shooting, and someone's setting up sort of the play. And so the person setting up the play technically does not go on the stat sheet as an assist or a shot, but certainly has a huge impact on the game. And so I think medical affairs sometimes falls into that spot, right, where they're working sort of behind the scenes with the KOLs, with the subject matter experts, and, having sort of a better viewpoint of the impact is going to be very important for the progression of that unit.
So one thing I want to share with all of you is also a very unique approach that I myself lived through at one specialty company that actually provided multiple and frequent rewards and recognitions that were not just financial, but that allowed medical affairs teams to showcase what they do, to analyze what they do, prioritize it, set autonomous goals, and then be recognized for the achieved milestones, for the entrepreneurial work streams they created, multiple metrics, a journal that was distributed to everyone, including the CEO. So there was no more question about what medical affairs is or what they do, which continues to persist in this industry and outside of the industry. And the company scaled, became the largest GI company in the world. It was Salix, North Carolina. And I'll give you the other side of that as well that I've lived through, just maybe to trigger some reactions and thoughts. And that is when a medical team was persistent for 2 years again, and convinced the senior executives team to do a head-to-head study and a new proof of principle, analysis in a new patient population, right? And they finally were able to do it. And they turned around the company, did sales training, received a lot of recognition individually, publicly, but informally as well from teams. Yet when they made a business case to their leadership, for promotions, for example, for their leader as well as for themselves. Yet not one person received any recognitions, even though new patients received access across the entire country, right? That, I think, is the real case study here that shows how medical drives revenue directly, which was confirmed by the executive VP of marketing in that case, right? $40 million, right, in a small 300 million market startup, right, after years of frustration, right, and for the first time in right, and so yet it didn't receive recognitions. These are some of the sentiments that I share with Jeff as well there, right, and why recognition is also tied to accountability, right? And when you don't have recognition, that means you're removing yourself from accountability. And if you're part of a business and you manage your budget, right, then whether you're setting up that play or you're blocking or you're a physical therapist on a team, you want to know how effective you are and right and justify your investment, and also while stimulating yourself and others to collaborate. And so here are some of the final thoughts as we wrap up this webinar that we have, and they are that the healthcare system is changing. Our environment is changing very rapidly. We have a growing complexity that's now translating into new pressure, right? And also opportunities to demonstrate our quality of the service we provide, the information that we share, and the context for this inherently analytical function of medical affairs. Transparency is a winning strategy, in today's world, right, where performance is exposed. To scale our impact, to anticipate, also to make those tough decisions a little bit easier, and to avoid repeat errors, as we talked earlier, and recognizing our contributions more consistently is probably that stimulus that we all need to make that growth and efficiency possible. So we do have one question here, and that question is, why do we really need to trace back the success of a company or a product launch or an outcome back to medical affairs? If we're part of a team, we work together with sales, with others, do we really need to trace that outcome back to medical affairs? So who would like to maybe join this debate and provide us with some comments here briefly for a minute? So.
Well, I'll jump in, Tim. I think there's a couple of thoughts I had. One is just resource allocation. If you're able to demonstrate your value to the organization, then you're more likely to get resources to continue functioning or expanding. I also think in this day and age where there's so much contraction, companies are changing hands, assets are changing hands. With mergers and acquisitions, being able to, it could be preservation. So those are my thoughts.
You have to justify the resources, right? Yeah, in order. Yeah. Otherwise, you may be undervaluing your teams, right? Or just considering yourself as a cost center, just submitting to everyone that, look, this is how much you should just right spend versus invest, right? Yeah. Graham or Alex? Alex, it sounds. Go ahead, either one of you. Go ahead.
I'll jump in then. I'll use this as an example. Marketing. So you've got intangible, tangible, right? Tangible is made revenues. Intangible, we think it had a big impact, but we haven't been able to tie it to that revenue. Marketing budgets always get cut when things are going well because you think you're not needed. Then the revenues go down and suddenly magically the marketing budget goes up again. So I think it's being able to show the work and the impact that function that is more intangible has on the overall performance of the organization is critical. Otherwise, it's assumed it's not needed to some degree.
Yeah, I was going to just jump on a little bit of that. Of you don't have to tie it to medical affairs. You don't have to, right? And then, it's going to come and it's going to have probably a negative impact either on the team and then on the company overall, because you need to be able to show the impact, and medical affairs is constantly working behind the scenes. And so when everyone's acknowledged, I think it does help sort of create sort of a better business case for increasing budgets in medical affairs, and also sort of increasing your visibility throughout the organization.
We have one other question. Thank you for those comments. So we have one other question here from Carla Amigo, which is, what are some of the most effective metrics that you've seen being used internally to demonstrate that value internally, across locally, regionally, globally, perhaps as well? Thank you, Carla, for that question. And this will be our last question before each one of you will share your final takeaways today. So yeah, Jeff, do you want to address that?
Coming from medical affairs, I think I can speak to this a little bit.
Sure.
So I think, those things that are impact, that we've agreed are impacts. So we think about access, addition to third-party formularies. I think about insights that have informed strategy, that where we have made changes to our strategy based on insights that have risen up through medical affairs, and just being able to show effects on treatment, whether it's a change to guidelines or something that's going on in the current discussion, in that therapeutic area. Those are the big ones.
Okay. And have you seen that used locally, regionally as well, globally?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, unless there's any other comments, the premise here for this webinar was that when you communicate again and you quantify your impact, you will determine how well you work, and also why your teams are going to work. So that would be my personal final thoughts, but I want to leave the last words to our speakers. Jeff, why don't we start with you, with a medical affairs perspective or any global perspective? And what would you like our audience to leave with today?
Well, I think this requires us to take a step back and look at what we're trying to achieve. I think we're often so quick to just start digging and each of us in our little areas and start working, and I think what's incumbent on leadership is to take a step back and say, these are the things that we really want to achieve, and this is how we're all going to contribute to that. And I think that's an important step that gets missed sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. Be introspective and reflective. Yeah. Alex, I think I saw you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say that understanding the bigger picture of the organization, and to the case study that you brought up, what's the one thing that is helping improve the company, and how are the employees doing it, and then having that organized and charting it and having it in detail and impact associated with that action for each employee, I think is very useful long term, and I think that's going to drive the success of an organization.
Thanks. Graham.
Got two comments really, the analytical and the emotional. So I think most people know what the Kelvin scale is. Lord Kelvin said, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. Is the analytical. Then you can't take the human out of the human. We're emotional creatures. I think, echoing what Alex said, knowing where an individual and a team's functions, role fits within the organization, the impact you have allows you to understand your purpose, and you can take pride in that. Better performance.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining this discussion and debate and sharing different perspectives, research, and data as well with our colleagues in our community. If you're interested in speaking to us at Amadev Pharma, here are some contact details for you to get in touch with me on LinkedIn, where I'm very active. Email here, timmick@amadevpharma.com. And also, stay tuned for the last of the monthly webinars on May 29th. Our guest speaker is Alan McDougall, formerly heading up global medical affairs at Astellas, to talk about smarter decision analysis with graded KPI recommendations. That will be our focus then. He'll be our special guest. And so those of you who registered will receive the slides and some references, as well as a bonus metrics playbook as well from Amadev Pharma. And thank you. With that, thank you very much, Graham, Jeff, Alex. Thank you. Bye.